Hello again, scholars. Welcome to the guided reading section of today's lesson. Just like I did in the vocabulary, I'm going to be stopping after each section. There are three. So after each section in this guided reading, I'll be stopping and maybe doing some side doodles to give you guys a better visual of the things that are going on in what Mr. Lopez and what you are supposed to be reading for today's lesson. So let's go ahead and get started. So, women in the Civil War. This is the background section. In the years before the Civil War, the lives of American women were shaped by a set of beliefs that said women belonged inside the home and not outside of it. The home was a private place that was run by women as they cooked, cleaned, and cared for the children. True women were also quiet and delicate, much too weak to handle the harsh realities of life outside the home. In the 1860s, during the Civil War, however, American women turned their attention to the world outside the home. Thousands of women in the North and South joined volunteer troops and signed up to work as nurses. It was the first time in American history that women played a significant role in a war effort. By the end of the war, these experiences had expanded many Americans' definitions of a true woman. All right, so let's kind of identify some important pieces in this and kind of draw them out. So in that first paragraph, I think it's really important to understand where it says the home was a private place that was run by women. So men's idea of women was what? It was that they cooked. So here's like a little cooking spoon. And here's a pot or a pan, I guess. They cooked. They cleaned. This is the 1800s kind of way of looking at what a woman is supposed to do. So obviously in 2020, things are going to be very different. But in some cultures, even today, this is still the case. For example, my grandpa and my grandma, they had a very strict understanding of what each of them were supposed to do. Grandma was always supposed to cook and clean while grandpa went to work while grandma stayed at home. Obviously, things are different now, but just to give you an idea of how they were. So they cooked, they cleaned. What's another cleaning supply? Let's get some Windex in there. They cooked. They cleaned, and on top of those two really difficult things to do, they had to take care of the children. So here's a little baby sleeping, and then let's say mom's got him by the arms. So this is men's idea of women. And this is before the Civil War. Before the Civil War. And then in paragraph 2, we read that once the Civil War started, women started volunteering for jobs because they wanted to help. People in general just want to help. So these women wanted to help. And so their efforts in helping eventually changed men's idea of what women can and can't do. All right, so let me go here really quick. Delete this. All right, let's dive into the second section. During the war, men weren't the only people to play a large role in the Civil War. Women in the Union and the Confederacy also did a lot to help. Some became nurses. Others became spies and passed valuable information. Others dressed as men and did some of the fighting themselves. Both the Northern and Southern armies did not allow women to enlist. To enlist means to join the army. Any woman who wanted to fight had to dress as a man. Women did not only fight, they helped after the fighting was over, too. At first, men didn't want the women to be nurses. Men felt that the horrors and violence of war would be too much for them to stand. Of course, the women proved them wrong. When more and more wounded men began to arrive at hospitals, it was easier to find more nurses than doctors. Doctors were overwhelmed with the number of injured. The women nurses did the jobs that doctors did not have time to do. The women saw all of the horrors of war. Every day they faced disease, amputations, and dying soldiers. The bravery and grit of women during this time showed that women could fight next to men. They also showed that women could be nurses. The women nurses did so well that nursing became an accepted job for women even after the Civil War. All right, so there are a bunch of important pieces here. Let's start picking them apart one by one. So let me go here. Let me change the color of my pen. Cool, have it be red. Okay, so in this paragraph right here, men weren't the only people to play a large role in the Civil War. Women became spies, nurses, and sometimes soldiers. So women transitioned from those things we talked about in the last section of cooking, cleaning, taking care of children, They transitioned into nursing. They transitioned into fighting. So when I say fighting, I mean as a soldier. Though they did have to pretend to be a boy because females were not accepted as soldiers at the time. And what else could they do? Oh, they also became spies. So I'm going to pick one of these three, and I'm going to draw it out. Because when I draw things out, it sticks in my head better. So if that's something that you feel like works for you, I would recommend doing that as well. So I'm going to do... Let's do the nurse. So I'm going to draw a little nurse here. There's the Red Cross, just like we read about. Here's a little nurse hat. These are old school nurse hats. So if you have seen any nurses in 2020, they won't wear these hats anymore. And let's give her some bangs. Cool. And there's my nurse. So now every time someone asks me about the job of women in Civil War, I'll probably think of this thing right here, and I'll think, oh, nurse. Okay, let's move on to the next section. Not next section, next paragraph. This one right here. Both the Northern and Southern armies did not allow women to enlist. Any women who wanted to fight had to dress as a man. So, again, this is no women as soldiers. That's the most important piece here. It's not a very long paragraph, so let's pick out what we can. No women as soldiers. Okay, next paragraph. Women did not only fight, they helped after the fighting was over. This paragraph is mostly about what women did after the war, but also why the men didn't want the women to have the jobs that they did in the first place. So, for example, men thought, and this is me paraphrasing the second to last sentence of paragraph 3. The men felt that the horrors and violence of war would be too much for them to stand. So men thought women couldn't handle. They thought they couldn't handle the war. They thought they couldn't handle the violence, the blood, and women definitely proved them wrong. They thought that women couldn't handle it. Okay? All right, and then let's combine these two because this is a conclusion paragraph and this is the last paragraph, so it's likely that they're going to be saying similar things, though not the same thing. All right, let's see. Cool. So these two paragraphs talk about nurses and the impact that nurses had after the Civil War. So by the end of the Civil War, there were more nurses than doctors. Nursing became a well-respected profession because being a nurse meant you saw amputations, so this is a person's arm cut off, amputations. They saw a lot of death, And what else did they see? Death, amputations, and there was one more thing. Disease. That's right. So I'm going to draw a little picture of a rat because rats often carry diseases. Squeak, squeak. Cool. So this is Mr. Lopez's way of annotating the text. Now, I've shown you different ways in class that include underlining, circling, highlighting. I'm not able to do that with the way I'm recording on my iPad right now. So this is a different way of annotating where you're kind of taking the most important pieces of every paragraph, writing or drawing them out so that they stick in your head better. Cool. All right, cool. Let's continue to the very last section of today's reading. Let me clear the board. Okay. So this section is about enslaved women. Enslaved women were, of course, not free to contribute to the Union cause. Moreover, they had never had the luxury of true womanhood to begin with. As one historian pointed out, being a woman never saved a single female slave from hard labor, beatings, family separation, or death. The Civil War promised freedom, but it also added to these women's struggles. In addition to their own plantation and household labor, many slave women had to do the work of their husbands and partners too. Eventually, Confederate armies forced male slaves to come and fight with them, and the women were left to provide for their families on their own. So this paragraph talks about the ups and downs that enslaved women face, even though men's idea of women in general was changing for the better. So let's see. Slavery was brutal for everyone. And this is the key word here. This is what the first half of this paragraph is trying to talk about. Even though men had this idea of what a woman was, that idea did not apply to a woman if she was black. Because if she was black, that meant she was a slave, and if she was a slave during the 1800s, she was not viewed as a person, she was viewed as property. So therefore, slavery was brutal for everyone, regardless of gender. And things only got more difficult for these enslaved women in the South. The Southern plantation's owner, so this is, hold on, let me back up for a second. Before war, and then we have slavery equals more difficult. And then I'm going to box in, this is during and after the war. No, let's say during, because let's do it just based on what the reading is trying to tell us. So slavery is more difficult. Let's think about the things that made it more difficult. If the Confederacy, the South, is forcing male slaves to come and fight with them, who is going to be left at the home front or at home to do all of the slave work that the men usually do? It's going to be the women. So even though lots of the men, of the male slaves and male white people are leaving to go fight in the war in the South, there are people who are staying, who are making sure that the work isn't falling behind, even though all those people are leaving. So slavery becomes more difficult for women because they have to pick up the pieces that their male counterparts are leaving while they go to war. So if a female slave's significant other usually works a cotton field, and she usually works indoors, she will now have to work indoors and do the job of her significant other. Let's see if there's anything else that's really important that we need to highlight. Nope, that's pretty much it. We got it down. Slavery was brutal for everyone, regardless of gender, and this is before the war, but slavery becomes more difficult for women during the war. This is because the men men are at war, comma, so women have to pick up their slack. And we'll see the exact same thing happening again during World War II. And when I say the exact same thing, I mean women picking up the slack of men because they're all at war. So hopefully towards the end of the school year, after EOGs maybe, we'll get to learn some about World War II, and we'll see history kind of repeating itself. All right, y'all. Have a great rest of your day. Remember to email or Google Hangouts me if you have any questions about the work. You should be able to see all the videos today. I tried to make sure of that. All right, guys. I will see you guys on Wednesday. Well, I'll see you guys on Tuesday for the video chat, Wednesday for the next lesson. Take care.